Revealed. Billionaire denied his maid's child. Then the amazing truth in the baby's eyes transformed his life forever. Thomas White sat at his grand mahogany desk, glaring at spreadsheets that buzzed with numbers. His sprawling mansion in Cedar Glen stood hollow around him, a testament to success that felt strangely empty. He was the archetype of the American dream, wealthy, powerful, and respected. Yet, as he reviewed quarterly projections, a gnawing discontent whispered in his mind. What did it really mean to have it all? Outside, the vibrant autumn leaves danced, the world feeling altogether different from the sterile conference room he inhabited. Was this the life he had worked so hard for? A fortress that shielded him from everything he had risen above? That afternoon, his assistant mentioned Maria's latest news with a lightness that dimmed as Thomas absorbed the information. She had given birth to a child. He cringed, battling an instinct to dismiss the thought. This was not part of the narrative he had scripted for himself. A single mother living in his employ? The societal judgment clung to him like a suffocating layer. Would people think him a fool for allowing such a misstep under his roof? A life born from the very ambition he had fought so hard to escape. He felt a mix of disdain and pity, muffling his voice as he rehearsed dialogue to confront her about professionalism. As the day dragged on, musings of Maria's new life echoed in the shadows of his mind, unable to silence the truth that he was hiding from himself. A wave of unease washed over him. He would never feel connected to the struggles she faced. He was rooted in privilege. He could hear whispers of the town, their murmurs emanating from cozy diners filled with laughter, simple joys his wealth couldn't purchase. This thought tugged at him, a melancholy lure that reminded him of who he once was, weaving tension through his thoughts. Before we continue, I need to tell you about something important that's happening. YouTube has been making changes to the system, and many people are losing notifications from channels they follow. If you're enjoying the content, click the bell and mark all notifications so you don't miss the next videos. And if you can leave a like, it really helps with reach. Seriously, it makes a difference. Oh, tell me in the comments where you're watching from. I'm always curious to know who's on the other side of the screen. Now let's continue. Days later, joggers and families rushed to enjoy the fleeting warmth of the fading sun at the park, shimmering golden light refracting off the scattered leaves. Thomas found himself unexpectedly drawn to the scene. He happened upon Maria and her daughter, laughing and playing beneath the canopy of autumn. For a moment the world paused. Little Sophia's infectious giggles reached him, igniting something long dormant within his chest. A curious hope flickered. What if there was a knotted thread connecting them? He hesitated, caught between his preconceived notions of status and a burgeoning need to bridge the gap that separated them. But as their eyes locked, the spark he found in Sophia's gaze shattered his carefully constructed facade. He could no longer ignore the weight of his own prejudices, the aching chasm of connection he had allowed himself to overlook. Questions churned in a chaotic storm. Could he allow vulnerability to slip past the rigid barriers of his success? Behind the gilded images he had projected, was there a place for Maria and her daughter in his rigid life? With conflicted emotions surging through him, Thomas felt a single tear slip down his cheek, carrying the weight of a choice that could forever redefine him. Would he step closer to embrace the uncharted territory of potential connection, or retreat to the gallery of isolation that echoed his past? The tension in his chest intensified, his heart racing as he lingered on the edge of an irreversible moment, uncertain of which path to take. As the sun sank below the horizon, transforming the sky into hues of crimson and indigo, Thomas stood frozen in the park, the laughter of a child ringing in his ears. The autumn breeze fluttered through the trees, yet he felt trapped in a moment where time had slowed, amplifying the gravity of his decision. He was standing at a precipice, and he could either leap into the unknown or retreat to the safety of his polished existence, devoid of the chaotic but liberating messiness of human connection. He could feel Sophia's innocent gaze still lingering in his mind, the spark of joy that welcomed him without reservation. It beckoned him towards a world he had consciously distanced himself from, a life where success did not tally up in accounts and accolades, but instead unfolded in shared experiences and vulnerability. But how could he breach the disparity that lay between them? The gulf of wealth, privilege, and expectations loomed, a chasm he had never truly acknowledged until now. With uncertainty gnawing at his gut, he slowly approached Maria, who had set herself on a sunbeam-dappled blanket, cradling Sophia in a warm embrace. Each step felt heavy, laden with potential judgment and fear. fear of unraveling the carefully constructed image of who he was supposed to be. "Maria," he began, his voice catching slightly in his throat. The chill of the evening air intensified his vulnerability, leaving him feeling exposed and awkward. "Oh, Mr. White," she replied, glancing up, wide-eyed and uncertain. Her tone was neutral, revealing nothing of how she perceived their class disparity, yet it hung palpably among them like an uninvited guest. I saw you both," he fumbled, words pouring forth as he struggled against the internal tide that threatened to pull him back. "You seem happy." Her demeanor shifted, a flicker of warmth sparking just beneath the surface. "We try to be, despite everything." Her eyes held a depth that cut through the facade he had long maintained. They spoke of resilience, unyielding hope, and the kind of love that thrived outside the confines of wealth. "Maria, I want to understand." The admission felt alien on his tongue, a crescendo of honesty that echoed gently against the hard walls of his upbringing. She hesitated, a moment stretched taut like a wire between them. "What do you want to understand, Mr. White? Life outside your mansion, perhaps? The joy of raising a child without a safety net?" He flinched at her words, acknowledging how accurately they pierced through the armor he had fashioned for himself. "It's not just about your life. Thomas's mind raced. Was he ready to see beyond his mirrors of self-importance? The walls felt suffocating, collapsing under the weight of their mutual truths. "I never realized how disconnected I was." Maria's expression softened, a blend of caution and curiosity. "Change isn't easy. You have built a world predicated on ambition, while some of us make our lives thrive in the crannies of hardship." Her words struck a chord, awakening him to the inherent disparities that defined their realities. This was a moment for truth, and it could redefine everything. Yet the paragons lifted by ambition wavered beneath the warmth of human connection. Discoveries of shared experiences or the realities of independent struggles struggled against guarded ambitions. As he searched for a response, one that would not betray his vulnerability, a surge of commitment rose. It no longer felt sufficient to simply understand. The world outside his walls beckoned with opportunities to foster deeper connections, to launch into the territory he had avoided. But that leap heralded risks he could not fully gauge. Would they still see him as their employer, or was there another role waiting for him, undefined yet teeming with possibilities? The silence thickened, laden with possibility. Could he step into this new identity, this personal revolution where status was replaced by substance? The moment hung in balance, his next move heavy with potential and peril. Then, unmistakably, Maria whispered, "You know, we could always use a friend." Would he have the courage to dive in unselfishly? The answer lingered with a weighty suspense, unraveling the threads that held him captive. The embers of change ignited within him, but the fear of the unknown gripped his throat like iron chains, and Thomas wrestled with the realization that the most significant battle was just beginning. Thomas's mind raced, the gravity of Maria's words echoing as he stood frozen amidst the falling leaves. In that simple statement, a request for friendship, lay the potential for a radical redefinition of himself. He felt the walls of his carefully constructed world quiver, the foundations of his identity cracking under the weight of possibility. The warmth of her offer was an irresistible pull, yet fear wrestled with longing. "What if I am not enough?" he whispered, partly to himself, partly seeking reassurance from Maria. This wasn't just about social appearances anymore. It was about who he truly was beneath his title, beneath the bulwarks of wealth that shielded him from discomfort. Maria's gaze softened, her response deliberate. "Thomas, we often underestimate ourselves. You've built a life on expectations and effort, but there is greatness in humility too." His heart quickened. This was the unvarnished truth he had sought, not the flattery of sycophants who filled his gilded existence. The honesty struck him like a lightning bolt. How much had he sacrificed for the veneer of success? How far had he drifted from genuine human experiences? The thought was both liberating and damning. As he looked at Sophia, giggling as she chased a crumpled leaf through the air, he realized how much he had missed. Her laughter was a reminder that life didn't happen within boardrooms. It thrived in the messiness of spontaneity. In contrast to the calculated maneuvers of corporate life, the delight of a child showed him an authenticity he wished to embrace. "I want to try," he found himself saying, the word surprising even him. It felt like a confession instead of an assertion. "I want to be part of your world. No distinctions, just humanity." Maria's eyes lit up, momentarily pushing through the shadows of doubt that had lingered between them. "It'll take work, you know. Finding a way to connect across an invisible line isn't easy, especially when the world perceives you differently." Those words struck him again. What would it take to transcend that line? It was more than words or intentions. It was about actions. Real, tangible steps into a realm where he might discover hidden talents or strengths long buried beneath his corporate identity. "What do I need to do?" Thomas asked, his voice steadier now, evoking a newfound determination. He could almost see the small fissures in his past beliefs widening as he spoke, hinting at a potential rebirth of character. "Start small," Maria suggested, her tone grounding him. "Attend community gatherings. Join efforts where your involvement can actually make a difference. Volunteer, not just to feel good, but to understand." He envisioned himself amidst unfamiliar faces, taking part in discussions, sharing thoughts, perhaps even receiving the challenging feedback he had deftly avoided. His heart raced with the idea. Re-engagement with the public meant shunning the isolation he had so adamantly protected. Yet somewhere in that discomfort lay an exciting promise of personal equity. Every act of solidarity could enrich him far more than the wealth nestled safely in his accounts. With resolve echoing within him, he nodded, accepting the challenge. "I'll do it. I'll find those opportunities." Maria smiled, a genuine reflection of hope mingled with cautious encouragement. "Then you'll discover who you really are. Not Thomas White, the billionaire, but Thomas, the man who dared to embrace the truth within the chaos." There it was, the spark of transformation lit. But with this burgeoning sense of purpose came a heavy realization. What if he encountered resistance? What if the very society he had belonged to rejected this new version of him? He had already sacrificed so much. Would he be willing to risk more? In that moment, the sun dipped lower, casting shadows that danced around them. As Thomas looked into the soft dusk, he felt the weight of uncharted roads ahead, questioning whether the warm glow of human connection would be enough to fend off the cold chill of rejection. Would he indeed possess the resilience required to carve a place for himself in a world previously deemed foreign? The very essence of his being hung in the balance, suspended in uncertainty and immense potential. With the world seemingly closing in, Thomas braced for the leap ahead, an urgent whisper resounding within. Was he prepared to face the echoes of his past, to embrace the promise of a new identity? Now, with every choice standing before him like a branching path, the journey looked daunting but irresistible. He sensed, intuitively, that the coming days would test every fiber of his resolve. The question resonated grimly, commanding attention. Could he truly confront the reckoning that awaited? The morning sun pierced through the sheer curtains of Thomas's penthouse, illuminating the mess of his own thoughts as he stood contemplating his next move. After Maria's challenge, he understood that the path to self-discovery would not be paved with pristine, scripted interactions. Instead, he questioned how to step beyond the polished veneer of his existence. What would the first steps feel like? He felt both exhilarated and terrified. Days passed before he made his first visit to a local community center. It wasn't the kind of place he typically frequented, filled with laughter and chatter that resonated like a foreign language in his ears. He entered, his presence almost tangible in the air, like a gust of wind that unsettles the serene atmosphere. People glanced his way, unsure if he belonged there. That flicker of judgment ignited a familiar insecurity within him. "Welcome!" A cheerful voice broke through his self-reflection. A middle-aged woman approached him with an outstretched hand. "I'm Linda, the director here. What brings you in?" "Hi, I'm Thomas," he replied, the name feeling like an anchor and a weight at the same time. "I was hoping to volunteer, to help out." He hesitated, the honesty of his intention colliding with years of practiced indifference. "Wonderful. We are always looking for assistance." Her smile seemed genuine, yet Thomas sensed an underlying curiosity challenging the authenticity of his motives. What would they think if they truly knew him? As he stepped further into the center, the initial tension in his chest began to loosen slightly. He was assigned to help with the arts and crafts session for children, something about the innocence in their eyes promising a glimpse of the joy he feared he could no longer access. Sitting among color-stained tables and crumpled paper, he watched their animated faces as they discussed their creations. "Look, I made a rocket!" a boy exclaimed, his hands thrusting upward in excitement. Thomas couldn't help but smile despite himself. But as he gathered himself to share a few encouraging words, he faltered. The world he left behind felt irretrievable, a vast expanse proven by years of shaping his identity around wealth and status. disabling him from connecting with the core of existence that thrived here. Determination ignited within him, and he pushed through his discomfort. "That's brilliant. What will your rocket do?" he managed to ask, the response of delight from the boy reigniting a slumbering part of his spirit. The tiny triumph reignited, Thomas began engaging with each child, deliberating in their simple joy. Yet, it was tempered with each laugh. A dissonance lingered, doubt about whether he belonged there. Would they ultimately see through his facade? As the session progressed, a little girl named Emily approached him with trembling hands, clutching a poorly drawn picture of a cat. "This is my cat, Whiskers. But I don't think it looks good." He kneeled down to her level. "Emily, it's beautiful, just like Whiskers. Sometimes we are our harshest critics." His voice softened, a sense of loss pushing through as he considered how many moments he'd chiseled apart in pursuit of perceived perfection. Her face lit up with unrestrained joy, a reflection of what he had denied himself for so long. That evening, as he returned to his penthouse, Thomas felt the familiar weight returning, but now it felt different. He was grappling with something unbecoming, self-doubt intensified by the fear of his past colliding with this new chapter. The question remained, how much of his former self could he surrender? Would the world around him grant him the grace to change? He stood at his window, gazing down at the city below, millions of stories unfolding. Somehow, amidst all the chaos, the loss he felt began to transform. It was no longer simply loss, but an opportunity to reclaim the fragments of the man he had left behind in the pursuit of success. As uncertainty swirled, he considered the roots of his fear and the allure of an uncharted identity. It was becoming more than just a social experiment. It was his lifeline. And within the depths of his introspection, a new question encroached from the shadows. Would he have the courage to confront the judgment that awaited him in even the most intimate corners of his mind? With that realization, the journey had just begun, and the risk felt monumental. The following morning, the sunlight came on stronger than the day before, coaxing Thomas from his restless sleep. With a pang of resolve guiding him, he set out toward the same community center, feelings of uncertainty beginning to amalgamate with something else, something like purpose. The prospect of engaging with the children again felt significant, as if he were inching closer to a new narrative. Upon arrival, he noticed the atmosphere danced lightly. Children were scattered across the playground, their laughter ringing like a melody of innocence that both inspired and unsettled him. He often navigated spaces where silence accompanied wealth, the absence of unrestrained joy now stark in contrast to his old life. Thomas took a deep breath, consciously loosening the grip of doubt that had tightened his chest during his previous visit. Linda greeted him warmly at the entrance. "Glad to see you back. The kids have been looking forward to you." The validation was unexpected, nudging at his fragile self-esteem. "I'm looking forward to being here," he replied, shifting his stance. Less of an imposter, and more like a participant. Today's task was different. He was to lead a session focused on storytelling. The brief had been simple but daunting. Encourage the children to weave their own tales with words and creativity. Standing before a small group of eager faces, Thomas felt that familiar wave of anxiety wash over him, mixed with the exhilarating prospect of genuine interaction. "Today we're going to create our own stories," he announced, voice steadier than he felt. As the children cheered, he felt an odd rush of empowerment. There was no wall of wealth or status here, only a shared human experience of crafting narratives. "Who wants to start?" he asked, scanning the room. A boy named Josh, bold and spirited, shot his hand up. "My story is about a superhero who saves cats." A wave of trepidation rolled through Thomas. He recognized the raw relatability in the boy's ambition. "What does your superhero look like?" As Josh animatedly described his character, Thomas was drawn deeper into the narrative. The stories flowed like water, personalities unfolding in vibrant colors before his eyes. One tale led to another, and with every shared laugh and gasp, he felt himself drop walls he hadn't realized he'd built around his heart. It was exhilarating and terrifying to let go of the guarded self. Yet, in listening, he was also faced with uncomfortable truth. Each story emphasized the importance of bravery, vulnerability, and authenticity, qualities he had never openly embraced. Could he truly allow his own barriers to fall, transforming the essence of himself he'd crafted into one more aligned with the truths being shared? During a break, he found Emily gazing at a book with wide, yearning eyes. "You can read it," she whispered, her eyes on the page. "But I can't." Driven by instinct, he sat down beside her. "Why not? You have stories inside you too." He gently urged her, hoping to convey that her worth wasn't tied to perfection. It was in her willingness to express herself. "I'm just not good enough," she mumbled, glancing downward, posturing a defeat he had known too well. "That's not true, Emily. That's something many of us think. But sharing your story is the bravest thing you can do. It doesn't need to be perfect." The resonance of his own words struck him hard, causing a rippling reflection on his courage to face his past and identity. As they continued their discussion, he felt the urgency to challenge his internal narrative. The children embraced their vulnerabilities, while he hesitated in a space where judgment festered within him. What if he were to share his own story, stripped of embellishments? The thought hung heavy in the air. That evening, as he stood alone again in his penthouse, a flicker of determination surged. He recognized the patterns he had allowed to define him, and felt a growing desperation for change, sensing clarity in his confusion. How could he become more than the phantom of his past? The words of the children rang in his ears, urging him toward a confrontation he knew he could no longer avoid. The time had come to face not only the judgment of others, but the harsher judgment echoing within himself. With that realization, he stepped towards a decision that approached with undeniable gravity, pushing him towards an answer he feared could reshape him entirely. Would he summon the strength to unveil his own story? As the city below pulsed with life, so too did the pulse of change beckon him closer. The days blurred together in a haze of routine, each passing moment filled with the reverberations of laughter interspersed with deeper conversations among the children. Thomas approached the center with a sense of eagerness he had not anticipated, yearning to lean into the experiences he was beginning to cherish. This particular morning, however, felt different. As he navigated through a maze of colorful play equipment, a knot of apprehension formed in his stomach. Today, he would grant a portion of himself to the group, a fragment of his story that had always felt too heavy to share. Was he ready to be exposed, vulnerable in front of these children who knew little of the isolation that haunted him? "Hey, Thomas!" The cheerful voice belonged to Mia, a bright-eyed girl who had quickly taken a shine to him. "Can you tell us a story today, about when you were a kid?" Her innocent request sent a jolt through him. This was not merely a prompt for a story. It was an invitation to unveil the scarred parts of his identity. Suddenly, he felt a spotlight on him, urging him to strip away pretense and facade, to share the truths he usually masked with polished narratives of success. Swallowing hard, he replied, "Okay, I think I can do that." The words felt clunky, laden with the weight of uncertainty. As he settled into a chair, surrounded by eager listeners, memories erupted within him like fireworks, some bright and vivid, others dark and seeping with regret. He began to recount tales of his childhood, painting pictures of carefree days in a serene neighborhood, tales laced with ambition and dreams. He chose to focus on the whimsical moments, that spark of innocence he so often wished he could reclaim. Yet as the words flowed, he felt the undeniable tug of his more painful truths. He mentioned the pressure of expectations, the relentless pursuit of perfection, the loneliness that prowled alongside him even in crowded rooms. He could see the children's eyes wide with fascination, but he was also acutely aware of the weight that settled in the space between them. Mia's expression morphed from rapt attention to a frown, her small voice breaking through. "Didn't you ever just play when you were sad?" The simplicity of her question struck Thomas like an arrow. Did he allow himself that escape? Did he seek joy amid sorrow? For years he had buried his emotions beneath layers of success. Now, speaking his truth brought an avalanche of regret and longing. He hesitated before answering. "Not really. I thought I had to be strong, to keep striving." As he reflected on their conversation, a flicker of realization dawned. Perhaps strength was not the absence of vulnerability. Perhaps it was the embrace of it. The realization sent a thrill down his spine, lighting a path he had never considered before. Later, as the sun dipped below the horizon, Thomas grappled with the impact of that day. The laughter and affirmation he received from the children had unearthed a memory he thought was long buried, his own capacity to play, to explore unencumbered by adult expectations. That night, he made a decision. He would journal his fears, his stories, and begin to rewrite the narrative he lived by. As he scribbled onto the blank pages, clarity emerged through the chaos. He needed to lead not just with authority in guiding the children, but by sharing the true essence of who he was. However, the thought laid heavy on his heart. What if his vulnerability only invited judgment? It would be a risk, and he could feel the edges of trepidation gripping him once more. Nevertheless, he felt an internal resolve blooming within him. There was no longer a choice to hide behind the wall of his past. Tomorrow, he would rise anew, not just as an observer of their joy, but as a participant in his own life. With that spark of commitment ignited, he turned the page in his empty journal, preparing for the risk that loomed before him. As he lay down to sleep, a question lingered in the air, echoing in the back of his mind. Would exposing his truth be liberating or devastating? The stakes felt impossibly high, yet the promise of transformation beckoned him forward. Would he dare to take the plunge into authenticity? Dawn broke with a promise yet unfulfilled, as Thomas's mind raced with the remnants of his resolve. As he readied for the day, an amalgamation of anxiety and determination churned within him. Today would not be another predictable cycle. Today he would embrace the vulnerability he had so carefully guarded. Arriving at the center, he was greeted by the familiar cacophony of playful shouts and laughter. A sense of warmth enveloped him. It was a stark contrast to the tightness in his chest. He observed the children flit about, joyous in their innocence. Their energy infused him with purpose, yet the whisper of doubt clung to him like a shadow. What if they turned away from him, repulsed by the rawness of his story? "Hey, Thomas!" Mia's exuberant spirit radiated as she rushed to him, her pigtails bouncing with each step. "Are you going to tell us another story? The one about the sad parts?" The directness of her question was disarming, yet it felt like a challenge that pierced through his hesitation. Thomas took a deep breath, feeling the air fill his lungs. "Yes, Mia. I think I will share something different today." The words spilled forth, edged with a mix of excitement and dread. Gathering the children around him, he prepared to navigate uncharted emotions. He began speaking, not as the polished mentor they were accustomed to, but as a man confronting his own wounds. He shared a story about the struggles he faced in school, the heaviness of being the smart kid, and how it often isolated him. As he described instances of feeling misunderstood, a strange sense of camaraderie blossomed in the space between him and his audience. The children listened intently, their faces revealing a mixture of sympathy, amusement, and recognition. He dug deeper, sharing the time when he felt like an imposter, struggling under the weight of unrealistic expectations. Thomas noticed the subtle nods and occasional frowns, expressions of empathy reflecting their own fears and insecurities. It was as if he had opened a door, allowing them to peek into lives unfiltered by adult pretenses. When he arrived at the climax of his tale, the moment he discovered the freedom of stumbling through experiences, he felt himself shedding years of pretension. "There was a day when I just let go and played," he told them, eyes sparkling. "And I found joy, real joy in the mess of it." Mia's hand shot up. "Like when we play the game where we all fall down and laugh?" Her eyes gleamed with delight at the idea of joyful abandon, a tangible reminder for Thomas that the essence of play was never lost at any age. "Exactly, Mia. That's what it can be like if we dare to be vulnerable," he replied, sensing a shift inside him. The words were liberating, but they held an unsettling reality. They required action beyond mere acknowledgement. By the end of the session, he had not only shared his story, but connected with the children in a way he had never imagined possible. They weren't just students, they offered a mirror reflecting back his own struggles and victories. In their laughter, in their acceptance, he found not only solace but a fierce encouragement to pursue his own journey of authenticity. After the day's activities, Thomas lingered in the quiet of the center, contemplating the possibilities that now lay before him. The journal he carried felt heavier. It was no longer just a collection of fears, but also a vessel for growth. He realized that revealing his truth was not about seeking validation. It was about learning how to thrive in the discomfort of honesty. With newfound clarity, he resolved to expand upon his narratives, not just for the children, but for his own healing. As he stood in the gentle light of the late afternoon sun, a thought gripped him. What would be the impact of sharing his journey with others outside the center? With each decision to embrace vulnerability, he sensed the potential for transformation, not just for himself, but for those he impacted. The tentative plan blossomed into an anticipation that quickened his pulse. That evening he picked up the journal once more, words flowing freely. Each sentence stitched together was a commitment to himself and the children, boldly putting an end to the masks and writing a legacy of authenticity. And as he penned the final lines for the day, a question began to take shape in his mind. Would confronting his past reveal a future he'd never dared to envision? The whisper of uncertainty lingered, but the thrill of possibility urged him to explore. What lay ahead was still obscured in mystery, yet the spark of courage ignited a path he was ready to tread. With the sun dipping below the horizon, Thomas paused in his writing, transfixed by the weight of his thoughts. He had always been a diligent architect of his own narrative, carefully constructing walls to shield his insecurities. But now, with a flick of the pen, he recognized the thrill of vulnerability, the strength it summoned within him. Just as he built his stories for children, he began to sketch out the path of his own life, ready to lay bare the truths he had long buried. On his way home, Thomas considered how he could extend his newfound authenticity beyond the confines of his classroom. The idea of hosting workshops, sharing his stories not only with children but also with teens and adults, began to take root in his mind. Would his experiences resonate with others who felt isolated in their struggles? That night, he craftily mapped out a plan in his journal, a combination of storytelling and personal development sessions that would explore themes of vulnerability, acceptance, and joy. This was more than just sharing. This was a call to action, a way to ignite courage in himself and in others. With each idea that flowed from his mind to the paper, adrenaline surged, spurring him forward. The next morning, Thomas woke with a steely determination. He had a weekend ahead filled with tasks that would set the wheels in motion. First, he would reach out to a few friends, those he deemed kindred spirits, to gauge their interest in participating. Their support felt essential, both for moral backing and for the insights they could provide. He sat at his kitchen table, phone in hand, reflecting on the qualities he admired in his friends. He hesitated only momentarily before dialing the first number. As he spoke to Ashley, an old college friend who had a knack for creative storytelling, her enthusiasm was palpable. "You're right, Thomas. Let's spread this self-discovery journey wide. I can help create workshops, maybe even a blog." Her excitement fueled his own growing ambitions. Next came Eric, a colleague from his previous job who had somehow become an invaluable sounding board over the years. He was pragmatic and grounded, the kind of voice that could lend practical structure to Thomas's vision. During their conversation, Eric offered insights that Thomas hadn't considered. "Have you thought about how you'll measure the impact? Feedback forms, testimonials, those things matter." "Absolutely," Thomas replied, his mind racing with new possibilities. Each conversation, each eager response, charged the atmosphere with a sense of purpose that he had never known before. As the day progressed, he reached out to several more close friends from different walks of life. Whether they were artists, educators, or social workers, their candid exchanges served not just to inspire, but also to illuminate pathways Thomas hadn't envisioned. Every voice playfully pushed the boundaries of thought and action, amplifying the tension and excitement swirling around his intentions. That evening, as he crafted a detailed outline of what the workshop could entail, Thomas confronted an inner fear. How would he engage with adults who might be resistant to vulnerability? What if his own stories met with skepticism? The questions prickled, but with each stroke of his pen, his resolve solidified. He reminded himself that this journey was as much about their growth as it was about his. The light in his living room dimmed as the shadows pressed against the walls, but his determination shone brighter than ever. By the time the moon hung high, casting a silvery glow around him, he had crafted the blueprint for his project, a gathering of souls seeking to connect through shared experiences. But as he closed the journal that night, a thorn of doubt crept in, forcing him to confront an unsettling question. Would the courageous facade he wore indeed crack under scrutiny, or was he prepared to face the tumultuous authenticity he sought to inspire in others? The moment of confrontation loomed, and in the air lay an unshakable tension, an unyielding anticipation for what would come next. Would his commitment withstand the pressures of public vulnerability, or would he unravel in the very same way he had always feared? As dawn broke, Thomas awoke with a heaviness in his chest that echoed a familiar sense of trepidation. He had filled his week with conversations, plans, and creative ideas, yet he was uncomfortably aware of the magnitude of the challenge ahead. Today marked the day he would present his vision to his small circle, and the anticipation settled like lead in his gut. Sitting in front of the mirror, his reflection stared back at him, a man armed with newfound purpose but battling old insecurities. The way his hands trembled as he fastened his collar revealed deeper doubts. Was he truly capable of leading these workshops? Would anyone actually benefit from his stories? He couldn't shake the haunting reminder of his own vulnerability. The stakes felt high as he envisioned the participants' reactions. What if they critiqued him harshly? What if his honesty pushed them away rather than draw them in? Shaking off those thoughts, he focused on the vision he had meticulously crafted. This was about connection, perhaps even about liberation for them all. When he arrived at the cafe that had been chosen for their gathering, he took a deep breath, inhaling the rich aroma of coffee that wafted through the air. It had the potential to ignite a new chapter, not only in his life, but in the lives of others. As his friends arrived, their faces lit with shared enthusiasm, he was captivated by the warmth of their greetings. It was a reminder that he was not alone in this endeavor. As they settled around a table, he felt the familiar flutter of nerves, but pushed through. "Thanks for coming, everyone," he began, his voice steadying with each word. "I wanted to talk about something that's been brewing in my mind for a while now." He could see their eyes widen with curiosity. He unfolded the idea of the workshops, weaving in his own story of struggle and vulnerability. He spoke about the catharsis he found in sharing his truth and how he hoped to create a space where others could feel safe to do the same. The air thickened with an electric charge as he laid bare his vision, each revelation forging a connection among them. As he approached the critical moment of asking for their support and involvement, doubt resurfaced. He hesitated, contemplating whether his vulnerability would invite backlash instead of solidarity. The brief pause felt eternal, but the thought of disappointing people who believed in him compelled him to keep speaking. To his relief, the response was overwhelmingly positive, each friend echoing their eagerness to contribute. Ashley's ideas proliferated with artistic flair, while Eric outlined practical logistics with a focus on constructive feedback. The discussions flourished, and with each suggestion, Thomas felt the weight of his earlier doubts begin to lift, though the shadows of uncertainty still lingered. Still, he knew there was more to confront. Beyond the apprehension of participants' responses, a more profound challenge loomed. How would he cope when people inevitably projected their own fears, vulnerabilities, and cynicism onto him? As the conversation morphed into brainstorming sessions, it became apparent that no journey toward authenticity came without backlash. The vulnerability he was about to embrace would demand resilience, not just to his own emotions but to others' skepticism. Later that evening, Thomas walked home, feeling both buoyed and weighted by the day's breakthroughs. His pulse quickened as he considered what lay ahead. The smile on his face faded as it dawned on him that sharing personal stories did not just require bravery. It required acceptance of criticism. Could he remain anchored when confronted with doubt, both within and from without? The journey toward vulnerability had only just begun, and already the question hung uncomfortably before him. How would he navigate the storm when rejection overshadowed his hopes? As he climbed into bed that night, sleep eluded him. The real challenge, he realized, was not merely about being open, but about learning to stand tall in the face of the very skepticism he once embodied himself. The next day dawned bright and crisp, illuminating the path forward for Thomas White. He woke with a sense of resolve that contrasted sharply with the nagging fears that had haunted him the night before. Today marked the first workshop in his vulnerability series, a leap into the unknown and a step toward not just sharing his story, but fostering a community built on authenticity. As he arrived early at the community center, the familiar sounds of laughter and mingling voices brought an unexpected surge of confidence. He was a man transformed, a conduit of shared experiences, and with each step toward the warm glow of the gathering room, he felt the connection pulsing through him, a visceral reminder of how far he had come from the isolated billionaire staring at spreadsheets in his sterile mansion. People began to filter in, each one bringing their own stories, their own struggles that had yet to find a voice. The room buzzed with anticipation, and as they settled into the semicircle chairs, a familiar pang of nervousness fluttered in his stomach. Breathing deeply, Thomas recalled Maria's words about strength lying in vulnerability, the mantra of his recent transformation. "Welcome, everyone," he began, his voice steady and confident. "I'm so grateful you're here today. This journey is about us, about sharing, listening, and growing together." The words flowed from him, weaving the atmosphere into a tapestry of connection and trust. He shared his personal narrative with a rawness that he had begun to embody, a billionaire who had lost touch with the simple joys of life, the laughter of children, the authenticity of friendship. He revealed the core struggles that had once defined him, the pressure for perfection, the fear of judgment, and the insatiable longing for true connection. "What I've learned is that vulnerability is not a weakness, it is a source of strength, and sharing our stories can lead to extraordinary healing," he declared, witnessing the subtle shifts in the attendees, the nods, the empathic gazes, the reflections of their own battles waging behind their polite exteriors. As the workshop unfolded, participants began to share their own stories, inspired by Thomas's example. Together, they vulnerably recounted their fears and dreams, laughing and crying as they connected through common threads of humanity. In that serene space, authenticity flourished. Thomas felt the walls of his previous identity crumbling, as if he were shedding a skin that had long restricted him. By the end of the session, the energy in the room was electric, filled with the promise of continued connections and future collaborations. Testimonials began rolling in immediately. Participants stated how refreshing it was to hear someone of his stature embrace their humanity, to witness a wealthy man wrestle with the same fears and insecurities they faced. Inspired by their reactions, Thomas felt an exhilarating surge of pride envelop him. Each piece of validation cemented his transformation. It wasn't just about him sharing his story. It was about creating a space where others felt seen and heard. He had intended to empower others, yet somehow he too was being empowered, reclaiming the authenticity he had long buried. As the day wound down, Thomas stepped outside the center, greeted by the gentle embrace of a sunset, painted in brilliant oranges and pinks. He had accomplished something far beyond mere storytelling. He had fostered connections and ignited hope. With each genuine smile exchanged and every story shared, the isolation that once defined him slipped further away, replaced with a rich tapestry of belonging. Standing amid the fading daylight, Thomas felt solid confidence align with a recognition of his newfound competence. He had proven to himself that he could connect beyond his wealth and status, establishing his position not through riches, but through shared humanity. Each participant had left with more than just a lesson. They had emerged with the tools to navigate their own vulnerabilities, empowered to do so through Thomas's bravery. In that twilight moment, Thomas White understood that he had not only transcended the limitations of his past, but also set forth on a journey of continuous growth. With every workshop, with every shared truth, he dove deeper into this narrative of authenticity, a story he would continue writing for the rest of his life. Now the question remained: what next? He resolved to grow this initiative, to spread the message of vulnerability and connection farther and wider than he could have ever imagined. This was no longer about wealth. It was about cultivating true richness, of the heart, the mind, and the spirit, built upon the foundations of honesty and community. This was his path, and for the first time in years, it felt like home. And now, in the spirit of transformation, I urge you to do something now. Subscribe immediately to the channel to not miss the next exclusive emotional stories that might just inspire your own journey of growth. Leave a like now to feed the algorithm, showing your support for powerful storytelling. Comment your reactions and theories about the ending. Your thoughts matter. Share instantly this video with at least 5 friends who need to see this conclusion, because you understand the importance of supporting stories of personal overcoming. This is the moment to show your support. Don't wait even one more second.